I found 400 deleted texts between my husband Daniel and a woman I'd never met. I recovered deleted data for a living, so instead of crying, I opened my laptop and started restoring the files. Message 112 was the only one with the word family in it, and it wasn't about me. 399 other messages didn't say family. They said I miss you. They said please don't tell her yet. They said I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this without you finding out. Every single one of them was sent between 11 at night and 1 in the morning, the exact hours Daniel had been telling me, for 3 straight weeks, that he was in his study reviewing quarterly numbers. I am a forensic data recovery specialist. Deleted does not mean gone, not on a phone that automatically backs up to a shared family cloud account, and in 6 years of marriage I had never once run a recovery on my own husband's data. I ran one that Tuesday night at our kitchen table, 40 minutes after he'd gone up to bed. The software took about 40 minutes to finish decrypting the backup shards. It took considerably longer than that for my hands to stop shaking enough to type the password back incorrectly. I have a rule. I call it the rule of 3, and I built it the hard way, 6 years before I ever met Daniel, on a case that still wakes me up some nights. A man named Arthur Ferris was about to lose his business, his marriage, and very possibly his freedom, because I had recovered one deleted email that looked, on its face, like proof he'd been quietly draining his own partnership account. I reported it. I was 26 years old and proud of how fast I'd found it. It took another examiner 4 months to prove the timestamp had been spoofed by the actual embezzler, who was still coming into that office every day, still smiling at Arthur every single morning. I got it right eventually. I did not get it right in time to save his marriage. His wife had already filed by the time the truth came back. So now I don't act on 1 file, I don't act on 2. I wait for 3 independent confirmations before I let myself believe anything a recovered document is telling me, no matter how certain it looks in the moment. It is the single most important professional habit I own, and it is the only reason I did not wake Daniel up screaming at midnight that Tuesday. Daniel Ashworth and I have been married for 6 years. His family's name is on a building downtown, the Ashworth Family Foundation, 3 generations of old Boston money that started in hospitality and now mostly gives out grants and throws a gala twice a year to remind the city it still exists. Mine is on nothing. I grew up 40 minutes south, the only child in a house my father eventually sold to cover what my mother generously called his mistakes. My father's mistakes had names, eventually plural, spread across almost a decade before my mother finally stopped pretending not to notice. I was 12 the last time. I remember the specific, ordinary Tuesday it finally ended, and I remember deciding, somewhere in the year that followed, that I would build a career out of never again being the last person in a room to know something true about someone I loved. I did not consciously connect that decision to marrying a man whose family kept its own secrets sealed inside beautiful old buildings. I am a forensic examiner. I should have caught that pattern years before I actually did. I put myself through a 2-year forensics certificate waiting tables, still a Doyle back then, years before I became an Ashworth by marriage and stayed, underneath it, mostly a Doyle by nature. Daniel's mother, Eleanor, has never once let me forget the difference. She calls what I do computer work, in the exact tone other people reserve for manual labor. She has told me more than once at more than one holiday table that Daniel could have married up. She says it like a compliment aimed at him and a small, precise cut aimed at me, timed so perfectly that nobody else at the table ever quite catches that it was a cut at all. 2 Thanksgivings ago, she introduced me to a foundation trustee as Daniel's wife. She's very handy, actually she fixes computers, in front of 40 people, and smiled the entire time like she'd paid me a real compliment. Daniel apologized for it the whole drive home. Eleanor never has, not once, not for that or anything like it, because as far as she's concerned there was never anything to apologize for. I met Daniel 4 years before we married, on a case that had nothing to do with romance at all. His firm hired Anchor Point to recover a corrupted server after a ransomware attack, and I spent 3 straight days on site running on gas station coffee while a very tall, very rumpled heir to an old money foundation kept appearing with actual food instead of just checking on his data. On the 4th day when I finally handed him back 4 years of donor records intact, he asked if I'd let him take me to dinner somewhere that wasn't a vending machine. I told him only if he understood I would still be billing the foundation for the full 96 hours. He said that was, without question, the most attractive thing a woman had ever said to him, I believed completely that I already knew exactly what kind of man I was marrying. None of that is why I finally opened his phone. I opened it because of one detail so small it almost didn't register at first. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had started deleting his texts completely, every single night before bed. Not archiving. Deleting, on a phone that had never once needed its privacy settings touched in 6 years of marriage. I almost let it go anyway. Daniel is not a man who hides things by nature. If anything, he's the husband who narrates his entire day back to me at dinner in more detail than I ever actually asked for, who still sends me photos of whatever ridiculous thing our neighbor's dog has done that morning, who once turned a rental car around 40 minutes into a business trip because he'd forgotten to kiss me goodbye and said it felt wrong the whole drive. 3 months ago at that same kitchen table, he'd taken my hand over a mostly cold dinner and said, out of absolutely nowhere, if you were ever in real trouble, actual trouble, I would fix it before you even knew it was broken. I need you to know that about me. I laughed a little and asked what had brought that on. He just shook his head. Nothing. Everything. Eat your dinner. I didn't think about that sentence again until the night I found the first deleted fragment. That's the man I married. Which is exactly why I told myself for 11 straight nights that the delete icon appearing 11:40 every evening meant nothing at all. Right up until the night I stopped believing my own excuse and opened my laptop instead. I want to say I agonized over whether it was fair to go looking. The truth is that I didn't, not really, not at first. 6 years of complete trust does not automatically survive 11 straight nights of watching someone erase something at the same exact hour, no matter how badly you want it to. The first fragments were the easiest ones to explain away. A contact saved only as J. A handful of photos, corrupted past recovery except for a single surviving thumbnail. A woman with dark hair laughing at something outside the frame, standing in front of a coffee shop I didn't recognize. A colleague, I told myself, a cousin, nothing. Then the message fragments started resolving properly, one recovered database entry at a time, and nothing got a great deal harder to hold on to. I called my business partner at Anchor Point, Priya and at 1 in the morning, because at 1 in the morning Priya is the only person I trust to tell me the truth instead of whatever I'm hoping to hear. Say the word and I'll pull the metadata myself, she said. Independent eyes. You know better than to be the only examiner on your own case, Mia. You wouldn't let a client do that. I told her I could handle it. She told me that wasn't actually the question she'd asked. We stayed on the phone anyway while I worked, her half asleep on the other end, saying almost nothing, just so I wasn't alone with whatever the screen decided to show me next. By 2 in the morning I had 90 messages back in fragments, out of order, spread across 4 months. None of them used a name. All of them said things no wife wants to read about her own husband. I miss you already, read one, sent at 11:52 on a Wednesday night, the exact night Daniel had told me he was working late on a grant proposal. I can't stop thinking about what almost happened, read another. Please don't tell her yet, I need more time. I read that last one 4 times, like the 5th time might change the words sitting in front of me. At 2:30 I heard the floor creak upstairs, and I closed the laptop so fast I nearly cracked the screen. I sat there in the dark with my heart slamming against my ribs, waiting to hear the bathroom door, telling myself that if he came down now I would simply tell him everything, right there, still in my robe, and let whatever happened next happen. The floor creaked again the other direction, the house went quiet. I sat with the laptop closed for 11 full minutes before I opened it again. I want to say I spent those 11 minutes deciding whether I trusted him. The truth is I spent them deciding whether I trusted myself not to be wrong about him a second time, the way I'd once been wrong about the man who'd stood beside Arthur Ferris every morning smiling while he quietly hollowed him out. I didn't confront him the next. I made his coffee the way I make it every single morning, and I watched him take a call in the hallway with his back half turned to me, his voice dropped low, and for the first time in 6 years of marriage I noticed that he had walked all the way out of the kitchen to take it, instead of just talking with the mug still in his hand like always. Work thing, he said when he came back, not quite meeting my eyes, nothing exciting. It was the first time he had ever lied to me about something small enough that it shouldn't have needed a lie at all. That, more than any one of the 90 messages, was the moment the floor actually tilted. 4 nights after the hallway lie, we went to a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, black tie, the kind of night Daniel usually complains about for a week beforehand, and then somehow charms an extra donation out of anyway. I wore the green dress he'd once said made him forget how to finish a sentence. He said it again that night, on the way out the door, like nothing in our marriage had shifted an inch. I spent the whole evening watching him work a room he's worked 100 times, easy and warm and completely unbothered, while I kept thinking about the phone sitting in his jacket pocket, 6 inches from my hand the entire night, and every single thing on it I already knew, and every single thing on it I still didn't. A donor's wife asked me, halfway through dessert, how Daniel and I were doing, in that specific tone women use when they already suspect the answer and want to watch your face while you give it. Perfect, I told her, and smiled the exact smile I'd been practicing at home in the bathroom mirror for a week without admitting to myself that's what I was doing. She said we made it look easy. I told her we'd had a lot of practice. Both sentences were true. Neither one was the whole truth, and for the first time in 6 years of marriage, I understood exactly how much room a marriage actually has for that particular kind of gap. Priya showed up at my house uninvited 2 days later, a bag of takeout in one hand like she was planning to sit there until I actually ate something. She didn't ask what I'd found. She asked if I'd slept, and when I told her the truth, she didn't say anything at all, just started pulling containers out of the bag like that was an acceptable answer to build a plan around. You're going to keep working the case, she said eventually, not a question. Because if you stop and just feel it instead, you won't be able to start again, and you need the truth before you decide anything permanent. It was, I think, the single most useful thing anyone said to me during the entire stretch of nights I spent quietly taking my own marriage apart, one recovered file at a time. 10 days later, 10 days during which I recovered an average of 11 new fragments a night while smiling my way through dinner like nothing in my chest had cracked in half, Eleanor summoned us both to the house on Beacon Hill for what she called a planning lunch. She meant the Ashworth Family Foundation's 25th anniversary gala, 12 days out now, at which she intended to announce Daniel as the foundation's next chair, the first real transfer of power in this family in a generation. She had been running the place alone since my father-in-law died 6 years earlier, and she wore that exhaustion the way she wore everything else about herself, like proof that she had earned the right to decide things for the rest of us. The board wants a clean story, Eleanor said, over salmon neither of us had touched. No complications, no surprises. This family spent 25 years building a name people actually trust, and I will not have anyone hand a reporter a single loose thread to pull on. Not now. She looked at me when she said anyone, only for a second, long enough that I understood exactly who it had been aimed at. Mia is very good at digging up things people would rather leave buried, she added, with the small, precise smile she keeps instead of a real compliment. It's practically her specialty. It must make for interesting dinner conversation. Daniel's jaw went tight beside me. I said nothing because I had learned years earlier that giving Eleanor a reaction was the same as handing her a gift. What I didn't say, sitting there with her little sentence still hanging over the table, I had recovered 19 more fragments the night before. 3 of them mentioned money. Eleanor spent the rest of that lunch describing the gala's seating chart in more detail than I had ever once heard her describe her own son. 400 names, she said, twice like the number itself was the entire point. Press would be there. A reporter from the Globe's business section had already confirmed 25 years of the foundation's reputation, she reminded us riding on one clean, unremarkable night. Daniel agreed with all of it in a voice I didn't quite recognize, flat and careful, the voice of a man reciting lines he'd memorized instead of ones he actually meant. I noticed it. I filed it away with everything else I wasn't ready to look at directly yet. By the following week I had enough of the picture assembled to stop calling it a picture and start calling it a case, the way I would for any paying client. A recovered receipt. $189, a hotel 40 minutes outside the city, a Tuesday afternoon Daniel had told me he'd spent entirely at the office. A recovered wire transfer confirmation, $4,200, sent to an account under a name I didn't know, the memo line left blank. And underneath all of it, in a recovered email thread with Grant Michaels, the Ashworth family's attorney for over 30 years, a man who had stood up at our own wedding, a subject line that dropped my stomach straight through the kitchen floor. Reopening the 1993 file. Custody documentation attached. I am a forensic examiner. I know the exact difference between suspecting your husband and holding the evidence in your own hands. That week for the first time I was holding the evidence, a hotel, a wire transfer. A family attorney quietly reopening some decades-old file. The same month Daniel started deleting his phone every single night. In any other case that had ever crossed my desk, I would have named it exactly what it looked like. A man quietly arranging custody of a child I didn't know existed before he'd found a way to tell his own wife any of it. I did not call Daniel that week. I did the only thing my training has ever actually taught me to do with one piece of damning evidence. I went looking for a second and a third before I let myself believe the first one. I wasn't in the room for what actually happened that Tuesday afternoon at the hotel. I only pieced it together much later, from what the woman herself told me, months after everything was already over. But I've turned it over in my head enough times since that I can see it almost like I was standing there. Daniel got to the diner attached to the hotel 20 minutes early, the way he does for anything that actually matters to him, and ordered 2 coffees before she'd even walked through the door. Josie Callahan was 33 years old, a home health aide from a town 3 hours west that Daniel had never once heard of 9 months earlier, back before an envelope from her late adoptive mother's closet had quietly rearranged both of their lives. She slid into the booth already talking, a folder clutched to her chest like someone might try to take it from her. She had Daniel's exact eyebrows. Neither of them would ever fully explain to me later how strange that was to notice, or how long it took either one of them to stop being startled by it every single time. "I brought everything the lawyer asked for," she said. "The discharge paperwork, the photo of the bracelet. I keep waiting for someone to call and say it was all just a clerical mix-up." "It wasn't a mix-up," Daniel said quietly. "I've confirmed it 3 separate ways now, and I am done being the only one who knows." He reached across the table and closed his hand briefly over hers, the exact gesture he uses on me when he's trying to hold something together for both of us at once. "How's Nora doing?" Nora's kind of heart defect had a name Josie could never quite say right on the first try, something with too many syllables for a 6-year-old who liked purple, but Daniel had learned to pronounce it perfectly within a week of finding out she existed. Her face did something complicated. They moved the surgery date up 11 days. "If we don't have the rest of the deposit by Friday, we lose the slot, and the next opening isn't for 4 months. He said her heart really can't wait 4 months. "You'll have it by Friday," Daniel said. "I don't care what I have to sell to make that true." "You still haven't told your wife any of this," Josie said. "It wasn't really a question." Daniel looked down into his coffee for a long moment. "I don't know how to tell Mia what my own mother did before she ever married my father, without it changing how she sees my whole family," he said. "Our marriage runs on the fact that she trusts my judgment completely. I am terrified this is the thing that finally makes her wonder if she should." That's the conversation I wasn't there for. I only had 400 broken fragments of it, arriving out of order at midnight, with no context at all and every reason in the world to read them the worst way there was. The worst message recovered clean that week: no corruption, no missing characters, time-stamped 11:58 on a Thursday night. "I love you. I've always loved you, even back when I didn't know your name yet. We'll figure out how to tell them. I promise." I sat with that one for a long time, 6 years of marriage, and the very first time I ever ran a search on my own husband's name was because some part of me had already stopped trusting him enough not to. I did not confront him that night either. I told myself it was the rule of 3 talking. Looking back, I'm not entirely sure that was the whole truth. 2 nights later I came downstairs for water and heard Eleanor's voice through the study door, pitched low, the particular register people use when they think the whole house is finally asleep. "You end it before Saturday," she was saying. "I don't care how. I have spent 30 years making sure that woman never became a problem for this family again, and I am not about to let you undo it 3 days before the biggest night of your professional life. Whatever you think you owe her, Daniel, you owe this family more." I stood in the dark hallway in my socks and understood all at once that it was worse than an affair. His own mother knew. His own mother had apparently known for a very long time, and instead of anyone simply telling me any of it, I had been left to find 400 broken pieces of it completely alone, at a kitchen table at midnight, with recovery software standing in for a husband who trusted me with the truth. That was the moment something in me stopped absorbing the damage and started working the case properly. For a full minute after I heard Eleanor's voice through that door, I just stood there in the dark hallway, running through everything I actually knew instead of everything I was afraid of. That's the whole discipline in the end, not never calm. Just the refusal to let fear substitute itself for evidence, even when fear is standing right there, offering to save you the trouble of looking any further. I did not scream, I did not throw anything. I went back to my own archive instead, the one place I keep absolutely everything I've ever touched, because deleting things properly is a discipline almost nobody actually practices, and I have built an entire career on being the person who never does it by accident. 4 years ago, the year we got married, I'd spent a weekend helping Daniel digitize a box of his late father's papers for the family archive, purely as a favor, purely because I am constitutionally incapable of watching anyone scan documents inefficiently. Somewhere in that box had been a single water-stained hospital discharge fragment, half the letterhead torn away, listing Baby A and Baby B Ashworth, 6 minutes apart, same date. I remembered thinking it was strange at the time. I remembered assuming it was a filing error, or some cousin nobody ever talked about, and scanning it straight into cold storage along with everything else, because that is simply what I do with paper. I never delete anything either. It took me 11 minutes to find it again, hash value still intact, exactly where I'd filed it 4 years earlier. It took another 20 to cross-reference the date against the public birth index and confirm what the fragment had been quietly telling me the whole time. Eleanor and Thomas Ashworth had twins in 1993, 6 minutes apart, 2 full years before their wedding announcement ever ran in the Globe. One of those 2 names carried forward into every record I had ever seen. The other one simply stopped, that same year, as though she had never been born at all. 3 independent confirmations, the fragment, the public index, and then, finally, message 112, fully restored, no longer 19 broken characters with no context at all. I don't know how to tell the rest of the family, or if I even should. But you're the only family I have left who didn't get a choice in losing me the first time. That has to count for something. I ran the hospital discharge fragment against 3 separate archive scans, just to rule out my own memory playing tricks on me, exactly the way I'd have done it for any client sitting across my desk insisting they already knew the answer. All 3 matched. There was no 4th explanation left standing. Not a mistress, a sister. A twin sister that Eleanor had erased from the family record 2 full years before she ever became Mrs. Ashworth, and was at that exact moment quietly trying to erase a second time. I sat at my kitchen table at 4 in the morning and felt something that was not relief. Relief would come later, and it would not come easily. What I felt first was a very specific, very cold anger on behalf of a woman I had never once met, and right behind it, the sudden understanding that knowing the truth hadn't actually fixed anything. It only told me exactly who I needed to stop. I called Josie the next morning. I didn't tell her who I was at first, only that I worked with Daniel's family and needed to confirm a few dates for an old file, the same careful, 3 times verified language I'd use with any nervous witness. She hung up on me twice before I got anywhere at all. By the time I finally told her the truth, that I was Daniel's wife, and that I already knew, she went quiet in a way that frightened me more than anger would have. Eleanor's lawyer called my job this morning, Josie said finally. Told my supervisor there were questions about my background. I got sent home. If I lose that job, I lose our insurance, and if I lose our insurance, the hospital wants the rest of Nora's deposit in cash by Friday, and I don't have it, and I am not going to stand in a ballroom full of people who already paid once to have me disappear. I'm sorry. Tell Daniel I'm sorry. Go. She hung up before I could tell her I had already forwarded everything, the fragment, the index match, message 112 in full, to Priya, to a family law attorney Priya trusted completely, and to Grant Michaels himself, with a single line underneath it. I know exactly what the 1993 file actually says. So will the board unless we talk today. Grant didn't call back for 6 hours. When he finally did, his very first sentence was that Eleanor had already told him to shred the physical file that same morning. I told him I didn't need the physical file. I have never once needed the physical file in my entire career. That is the whole point of what I do for a living. I told Daniel everything 2 nights before the gala, at our kitchen table, the same table where all of this had started. He put his head in his hands for a long time before he could say anything at all. I kept thinking if I just fixed it quietly, got Nora her surgery, got Josie somewhere safe, none of the rest of it would ever have to touch you, he said. I didn't want you to have to choose between my mother and me. I've watched her do that to people my entire life. I couldn't stand the idea of doing it to you too. You didn't get to make that decision by yourself, I said. Not about my own marriage. I know that now, he said. I am so sorry it took nearly losing you to actually learn it. He took my hand, the same grip from that dinner 3 months earlier. I told you once that if you were ever in real trouble, I'd fix it before you even knew it was broken. I meant that about you. It never once occurred to me to ask whether you'd want that same thing done for you, and I am finished making that particular mistake. He wired the rest of Nora's deposit himself that same night, before I even had the chance to suggest it, and told me afterward that it was the first fully honest thing he'd done in 9 months that didn't feel, to him, like a confession. Daniel and I drove 3 hours west the next morning, the first time either of us had ever been anywhere near the town Josie lived in, a town neither of us had known existed 9 months earlier. She opened her door already braced for something, the folder from the hotel diner still sitting, I noticed, on her kitchen counter, like she'd never quite put it away. I'm not asking you to come to the gala, I told her, before she could say anything at all. I'm not asking you to prove anything to a ballroom full of strangers. I just need you to know that whatever happens in there Saturday, it happens whether you're standing in the room or not, and it isn't happening because I decided you're family, it's happening because you already were. Nora came out from the back hallway in socks and a nightgown covered in cartoon dinosaurs, took one look at Daniel, and announced, with the complete confidence of a 6-year-old who's apparently already decided something important, "Are you my other uncle now?" Daniel knelt right down on the kitchen linoleum and told her he'd been trying to figure out how to ask her the exact same thing. Josie cried for a while after that, standing at her own sink, and didn't apologize for it once. I decided right there in her kitchen that I liked her enormously. The gala went ahead exactly on schedule, that Saturday, 400 guests in a ballroom that smelled like lilies and old money. Eleanor 3 sentences into introducing Daniel as the foundation's next chair, when Walter Kessler, a board member who had sat beside my father-in-law for 20 years before he died, stood up from the front table with a folder in his hand. Before we vote, Walter said, I'd like the board to see something Mrs. Ashworth's daughter-in-law sent me this morning. I hadn't sent it to Walter myself. Priya had, on my instruction to exactly one person outside this family, chosen because Walter Kessler was the one man on that entire board who had genuinely loved Thomas Ashworth, and who would ask the one question Eleanor could not survive answering in public. Eleanor, Walter said, not unkindly, is it true that you and Thomas had twins in 1993, 2 full years before your wedding announcement ran, and that only one of them ever appeared on a single Ashworth family record afterward? The room did the thing 400 people do when they all stop pretending, at exactly the same moment, not to be listening. Eleanor's face didn't crack so much as reset fast into something colder than I had ever once seen her wear at a family dinner. That woman, Eleanor said, and her voice carried further than she meant it to, was never going to be part of this family. I made a decision 30 years ago to protect what we built. I would make again tonight if I had to. Her hand had found the edge of the podium at some point during that sentence, and was gripping it hard enough that I could see her knuckles whiten from 12 feet away. You would make it again, Daniel repeated, standing now, knowing she has a 6-year-old daughter who nearly lost her window for heart surgery, because you'd rather threaten a stranger's job than let this family find out what you did 30 years ago? Eleanor didn't answer that. She didn't need to. The silence answered for her, in front of 400 people who had spent 25 years believing the Ashworth name actually meant something. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom I heard a woman I didn't know whisper the name, Callahan, to the man beside her, like she'd just placed something she'd heard once before and hadn't understood until now. Whatever else happened in that room tonight, I knew right then that Josie Callahan would never again be a secret this city could fully put back in its box. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then an older woman 2 tables over gathered her wrap around her shoulders and walked out of the ballroom without a word to anyone, her heels loud on the marble the entire way to the door. 3 more people followed within the minute. Eleanor watched every single one of them go, and for the first time in the 6 years I had known her, she looked her actual age. The vote to confirm Daniel as chair happened 40 minutes later than scheduled, once the room had mostly stopped buzzing and passed without a single dissent. Eleanor did not stay to see it. Grant Michaels did not stay either. I noticed Walter Kessler watching the door long after both of them had gone, like he was making sure they'd actually left. The board's ethics committee opened a formal review within the week, not over the original decision itself, which no attorney could touch after this many years, but over the sealed adoption file that Grant Michaels eventually admitted. under oath, Eleanor had paid to falsify back in 1993. Falsifying a state adoption record is not a family matter. It is a felony, and a 30-year-old one doesn't stay buried simply because the person who buried it is used to getting her own way. Eleanor stepped down as chair before the committee could vote to remove her. Grant resigned from the firm that carried his own family's name before the state bar could finish deciding whether to do it for him. Daniel took the chair anyway, on one condition: he wrote into the transition agreement himself, standing, ongoing funding for any of Nora Callahan's medical needs the family's insurance didn't cover, for as long as she needed it, and a permanent seat on the foundation's family council for her mother. The Globe ran the story 2 days later, above the fold in the business section, under a headline that used the word reckoning, without any help from me. Eleanor did not comment. For the first time in 30 years, somebody else finally got to decide what the Ashworth name meant in print. 6 weeks later, Josie sat at our kitchen table for Sunday dinner, Nora curled up in the chair beside her in dinosaur pajamas, showing off a fresh scar to anyone who'd hold still long enough to look, and insisting that the surgeon had said she could run track someday, if she ever wanted to. Daniel set an extra plate down without anyone asking him to, the same easy motion he uses for me every single night, like it had always belonged there. Message 112, Josie said suddenly, halfway through dinner, half smiling into her water glass. I still think about that message sometimes. I almost didn't send it. I didn't think I counted as family yet. You always counted, Daniel said. I just never knew how to say so out loud until it was almost too late to matter. Nora, half asleep against Josie's arm by then, opened one eye long enough to inform the whole table, with great seriousness, that she had decided Mia counted as an aunt now too, not just Daniel. Nobody at that table corrected her. Nobody at that table has corrected her since. Later that night, after Josie and Nora had gone home, Daniel found me back at the kitchen table, laptop closed for once, and pressed his thumb once, gently, along my jaw, the way he does when there's nothing left that actually needs explaining. I used to think my whole job was proving that nothing digital ever really disappears, I told him. I think I finally understand what that actually means. Not the files. The people. Nobody in this entire family was ever as gone as somebody badly wanted her to be. I thought about Arthur Ferris for the first time in months that night, and for the first time it didn't hurt quite the way it always had. I couldn't fix what happened to him. I could only ever make sure I never made that particular mistake again, in either direction, too slow to look, or too quick to believe the worst once I finally did. This time, for once, I'd gotten the timing right. I was already loved. The whole time I was so afraid I wasn't. I only ever had to recover the proof. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.